Previously, on And You Thought It Was Safe.
Isn't there something more you could do? Something to make all your fellow nerds turn their backs on you.
Well, there's always this film's sequel. Like its dual protagonists, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is a teetering tower of contradictions. A heartfelt study about the nature of humanity, power, and the dangers of assuming the worst about people in a world where that's often the safest option. Fatally compromised by its need to also be the foundation of at least 3 other movies. Its almost impossible to say title is made out of nothing but keywords, designed to appeal to almost no one outside the WB's marketing department. And post-release interviews tell me director Zack Snyder came up with that himself, specifically so the marketers, too lazy or too stupid to know about the oceans of goodwill they could have generated if they just called the damn thing World's Finest, the way some of us wanted, would leave him alone and let him tell his story. Or at least step the fuck back. Because of this, the movie's almost impossible to parse in the standard plot summary with bad jokes style that we internet critics are known and loved for. Even though I'm still gonna try my damnedest. My efforts are somewhat complicated by the fact that every film-loving, comic book-reading nerd on the internet decided to hate this movie the moment they heard about it. 3 long years before it even came out. Don't say you didn't. You did. I can count the number of people who didn't on one hand and still have enough fingers left over for at least 2 obscene gestures. Most of my peers hated Man of Steel with the fiery passion of a star that's only 4.5 billion years old. There were times during that 3-year gap when I flat out said to myself, fine, guess it's just me, Armand White, and Twin Perfect out here, and none of you fuckers are getting any of my rum. In fact, now that he works at the National Review, Armand's not getting any of my fucking rum either. Fuck you, buddy. Roger Ebert was right about you all along. Even those who gave Man of Steel the time of day jumped ship the moment they heard its sequel would feature 99.9% more Batman, rightly fearing The Dark Knight would hog 100% of the spotlight. That process accelerated when Ben Affleck got the cowl and received the instantaneous torrent of hatred every new live-action Bat actor's received since Michael Keaton. I can still hear my fellow Bat fans wailing back in 1988. Ugh, Mr. Mom? Really? Gag me with roughage. And in 1995. Ugh, Doc Holliday? Really? Fuck me gently with a chainsaw. And in 2004. That dude from The Machinist? Really? Didn't he almost just starve himself to death? At least Affleck had the benefit of living predecessors who could give him their blessing without recourse to a seance. And he's not a Brit, so no one could dare call his casting un-American, like idiots did when some people got their current jobs. This movie's corporate masters didn't help either. Forces inside the WB have been trying to make a Justice League movie since at least 2007. Which was probably when they first heard of Marvel's plan for the Avengers. Remember that year or so after Batman Begins and Superman Returns? When we nerds were all fantasizing about Brandon Routh and Christian Bale leading the Justice League? And you thought it was safe, remembers? With Batman-Superman's announcement, the Justice League hype train finally pulled out of the station at full steam, aiming for a head-on collision with Avengers 3. And they couldn't resist spoiling every single one of the surprises Marvel used to leave for nerdy website writers to tease out in our reviews and news stories. None of it helped. Not even with me, because at this point I trust the WB about as far as I could kick them. They can crow about being filmmaker-driven all they want. I won't believe it until they stop cutting whole subplots out of their supposedly filmmaker-driven films. As a movie studio, old Auntie WBs responded to the triple threat of piracy, Netflix, and TV shows that are actually worth watching by trying to hawk extended edition DVDs and Ultimate Edition Blu-rays on a population that hasn't seen a real raise in 40 fucking years. No one's ever going to buy them at the rate the WB needs in order to make the kind of money they want to make, which is, of course, all of it. Especially not when the entire professional movie internet decides to hate your film 3 years in advance. And I just know, that at some point they all gathered around a table in the bowels of WBHQ and wondered aloud to each other, why are our DVD sales so low? But none of this is surprising to me. This is the WB, the company that insisted on splitting the second Matrix movie in half, ensuring that both would forever taint the original's reputation. The company that insisted an entire hour disappear from Watchmen before shitting it into theaters in mid-January, where bad films always go to die. The company that insisted the seventh Harry Potter movie become 2 Harry Potter movies, beginning an asinine trend that's infected every other major studio by now, even your beloved Marvel Disney. The company that insisted Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies become yet another goddamn trilogy, because by then they had to plug a Harry Potter-shaped hole in their annual budget. The company that inserted Batman into their extended cinematic comic book universe the first chance it got, because Batman to them is nothing more than a billion-dollar payday. Or, at least he was. Until now. All I'm saying is, don't celebrate this movie's financial failure. If you think anyone will learn any of the lessons you want them to learn from its underperformance, let me ask you an honest question. When have they ever done that ever? The litany of failures I just rattled off is plain for anyone to see. The WB chooses not to see it, because Jarrell was right. They're a pack of fools. Every last one of them. And hell, I'm right there with them. I paid to see Green Lantern opening day.
Sounds to me like someone is stalling.
You're right. People often rhetorically wonder, why can't Batman and Superman just be friends, like they were back in the 50s and 60s? Well, kids, it's the same reason the Seahawks and 49ers can't just be friends. The NFL doesn't care who you root for. The same people get paid either way. But nothing guarantees a fat payday for everyone involved, like a 49ers-Seahawks game with a Super Bowl slot on the line. Not to get West Coast on you or anything, but you and I know it's the best side. Such is the bloodless, thoughtless anti-logic that drives our international media monopolies, including both major comic book companies and their corporate overlords. Knowing this used to be the first step in what we used to call critical media literacy skills. But I guess that went out the window when the standardized tests came in. Thanks, No Child Left Behind. You managed to leave everybody behind, and now those of us who escaped your wrath have to explain everything from scratch every single time. The Batman tells us a version of this very truth in his opening monologue. There was a time above, a time before. There were perfect things, diamond absolutes, but things fall. Things on Earth. Self-evident, perhaps, but the self-evident evidently needs restating these days. And this is why the film opens up by juxtaposing Bruce's parents' death outside a theater showing Mark of Zorro, and promising that the 1981 John Borman film Excalibur will start next Wednesday, with Bruce running away from his parents' funeral and falling into the future Batcave. I had to laugh into my hand when that second production credit came up. An Atlas Entertainment / cruel and unusual production. I know a lot of people who considered this a cruel and unusual production, and they probably consider this review crueler and more unusual still. I heard you, back when this came out.
Must we suffer through all this again? Everyone already knows Batman's origin story.
Really? Because the last time someone filmed this, it took place outside of an opera showing Mephistopheles, an 1868 Faust play that bombed when it first came out, probably because the conductor sucked. Mark of Zorro's a much better family outing. Hell, I'd take my kid to any theater showing that and Excalibur, no matter what shitty part of town it was in. Besides, Zorro and King Arthur, no, not that one, have some obvious parallels to our dual protagonists that, based on reactions to this film, weren't made obvious enough. Zorro is an aristocrat by birth, who nevertheless dons a mask and cape to help the downtrodden citizens of his homeland. King Arthur is the orphan child of two worlds, Roman and Celt, Kryptonian and Kansan, whatevs. Raised as a commoner, but destined to lead his people into a new golden age of magic and light and wonder, and, yes, justice. Or die trying. Actually, I should say and die trying, but it's okay. He'll come back to life again. And even the priest at his funeral will do everything but flat out say so, straight to your faces. Near the end of this film, you can almost see him fighting the urge to wink at the camera as he reads Isaiah 26:19 to Clark Kent's grieving loved ones. Your dead will live, O Lord. Their bodies will rise again. Awake and sing, ye that dwell in darkness. Oh, right. Spoiler alert. But you know what? I think I just discovered another thing to hate about spoilers. Over and above the problems of self-infantilization, the hobbling of post-release movie criticism, and my personal belief that it's impossible to spoil a good story, while spoiling a bad story is a public service that should get you at least some kind of medal. Clever foreshadowing was the original spoiler. Sorry, Stephanie. But after years of avoiding spoilers like the plague, it seems people have forgotten how to see foreshadowing, even when it smacks them right in the face. The few who haven't are more annoyed by it than anything.
Yes, how dare this film insult my obviously superior intelligence.
So after the Wayne's death, young Bruce once again falls into the boarded-up hole of bats in his backyard, and they once again mob him. In contrast to Batman Begins, this time he rises immediately, without his father's aid, and we realize we're watching a dream. Just in case we don't, adult Bruce pipes up to tell us that, in the dream, they took me towards the light. A beautiful lie. That light/lie delivers us to Metropolis, on the day mankind is introduced to the Superman. Turns out Zod first tested his heat vision on the Wayne Enterprises Metropolis office, and Bruce is the only fool dumb enough to run towards its collapse. He finds and rescues an employee named Wallace, who's trapped under an I-beam. So that's one Wally with broken legs I can't blame on Grant Morrison. Sorry, that was for my Flash homies. Peace. Crucially, Superman's barely seen during this, the climax of his last movie. He's a distant speck in the air that shatters scenery. The view on the ground is filled with nothing but brick dust and falling paper. And if you want proof that 9/11 broke everyone's brain, look no further than the fact that my colleagues saw all of this and thought, well, this is all somehow exploitation of that fateful day we swore never to forget until we all forgot about it. Frankly, that's an insult to entire generations of exploitation filmmakers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Time was, you had to abuse dead animals or live actors to enter into their ranks. But the bar for everything seems lower in this horrible century of ours. Hell, maybe mine is too, and that's why this opening instantly hooked me. Except no, I know why it hooked me. For one thing, the image of Batman wandering around in smoke past a riderless horse is even more evocative than all the burning buildings in this franchise and Godzilla's combined. Most fitting metaphor for the DC movie universe I can think of. Also, Bruce's actions made me instantly go, okay, yeah, that's Batman. Not just because he runs toward a collapsing building, but because he does so out of fealty to his employees. As you'd expect, Batman has some serious abandonment issues. And when he's not dealing with them by handing out free ninja training to every orphan, or half-orphan, hell, who wanders into his cave, he's getting really paternalistic about his employees. And if Batman and Superman must have this bullshit playground fight, as their corporate masters insist that they must, at least this film had the good sense to traumatize Batman the right way. Killing members of his family will always get you his special attention, and There's another reason I like this opening, but let's put a pin in that for now. We must go forward, 18 months after the Battle of Metropolis, to Africa, where Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen are trying to interview a warlord who almost shoots them both once he finds out Jimmy's a CIA plant. At least Jimmy gets to say his own name in the ultimate cut of this movie. I walked out of the theaters without even knowing it, so the unhinged reaction of his fanbase caught me completely by surprise. Still, it was nothing like it was back in 2013, when Jimmy Olsen fans, and don't laugh, they exist, some of them are even the editors-in-chief of major comic book news websites, went completely apeshit over the very idea, just the possibility, that Jenny, the Daily Planet intern, was supposed to be Jimmy's gender-swapped counterpart. Because that's the kind of world we live in. And the ask of these films, quote Perry White, is always, what if Superman landed in a world like ours? Well, he'd be immediately embroiled in international incidents, like the one that opens this story, and become a pariah to everyone he didn't personally pull out of a burning building or a hostage-taker's arms. We'd heap all sorts of expectations on his shoulders, view his every deed through the least charitable lens we could find, and basically condemn him as the giant fraud Lex Luthor's about to call him in, say, 2.5 hours. All kinds of crazy assholes would waste tons of time trying to kill him, and odds are one of them might just be rich and crazy enough to pull it off. And people still wonder why Jonathan Kent tried to keep his boy down on the farm. So Jimmy Olsen catches a bullet in what may or may not be a sly fuck you to the unhinged, raving, misogynist caucus of his fan base. Before Superman saves Lois from the general that's about to shoot her, and the CIA drone that's about to bomb her. Looks like another Tuesday in another DC universe. This plan to stop a civil war by duping a reporter into finding one side's base is almost stupid enough to pass for a CIA op. There's just not nearly enough arming of America's enemies, either accidentally or on purpose. Seems Lex Luthor's cornered the market on that in this dimension. And the mercenaries he's got on site begin murdering people before Superman shows up, only to escape in the subsequent chaos, so Superman can get all the blame. This won't be the last time the bad guys will get away with something because the good guys are distracted. And where the hell does that general go once Clark takes him through what looks like several walls? He pretty much vanishes from our story in every cut. And that makes me think this whole opening act could have used a few more seconds in the microwave. Despite that, I do like how, not even 2 years on, Lois and Clark have their double act down to the point where they can communicate with glances. Trust me, for these two, 18 months is a fucking record. Lois still withholds stuff from him. Like the bullet that's going to set her on the path to unraveling this whole damn plot, winning her the MVP award once again, and officially making her this movie's third protagonist. But be honest, if you were her, your significant other's whole flying savior act would get real smothering real fast. Better to keep him in the dark about some things while he cooks dinner, and then launder your bloody shirts on those infuriatingly perfect abs. He might occasionally get a bit sad about how everyone on the TV talks about him like he's a walking bomb. But let him climb into the tub with you and watch him make that stupid grin and everything'll be alright. You're goddamn right I'm happy. Shit. By the time I got into comics, these two were already engaged. Every reboot of their relationship has been a frustrating exercise in waiting around for them to catch up to where I found them in 1994. Yet, here we are, one movie and change in. And there they are, already flooding the apartment downstairs. Before all the fan service, though, this general tells Lois something important. Not the theme of this film so much as, let's call it the anti-theme. Men with power obey neither policy nor principle, Miss Lane. No one is different. No one is neutral. This entire film, or however much of it survived the kindly attentions of franchise-minded boardroom operators, is arrayed against that idea. Many a character will repeat it, under many a context, showing that it's become the default thinking of this world as it is in ours. We're not supposed to mention that, but come on. This is America, where everyone supposedly wants power specifically so they can get away with ignoring principles. Given that the powerful are assholes who ignore principles, everyone would become an asshole if they ever got their hands on even the slightest little bit of power. Because that's the only possible appeal power could ever hold for anyone ever. And this is, of course, antithetical to the idea of Superman. He exists, and indeed, all superheroes exist, to contend that power, no matter how extraordinary, is really a tool. You can use it to help people as much as hurt them, but the idea that it can only ever hurt is an idea Clark will spend this entire film struggling against. He'll almost succumb to it, and then die trying to prove it wrong, partially to someone who spent the whole movie trying to kill him. Because here, at the beginning, this bleak view of power has entirely consumed the Batman, to the point where he started branding people. And those people have started catching shanks as soon as they get to prison, as part of an ongoing plot by Lex Luthor to drive Batman even crazier than he is already. Another plot point left out of the theatrical cut, because why the fuck would that be important? Being in Metropolis on the day Zod came knocking obviously broke Batman's brain. Which brings up the last reason I like that opening. In a not-so-subtle way, this Batman views this Superman the same way every nerd on the internet viewed him when they called Man of Steel the worst movie of 2013. A year that saw the release of Texas Chainsaw 3D, Death Race 3, Inferno, and Lake Placid: The Final Chapter. All of which are real, and not at all made up by me as part of some sick joke. Unless the joke's on all of us. Ha ha ha. To my fellow internet nerds, this Superman is a thoughtless engine of destruction who should be stopped as soon as possible. So I'm not really surprised so many wound up calling the Batman who shares their view not Batman. A little too close for comfort, wasn't he? Remind you a little bit too much of yourselves? Except you don't have $1 billion of inherited money at your back, and you don't get invited to all the cool parties where you might bump into Wonder Woman. But hey, on the other hand, you don't have to wake up to a breakfast of pain pills and last night's wine. You know, unless you want to. Wouldn't recommend it myself. Don't try to tell me you called him not Batman just because he kills people. The Batman you met in 1989 killed plenty of fools, and by 1992 he'd even started killing them smiling. And that whole, "I'm not gonna kill you, but I don't have to save you" line from the end of Begins always sounded like a weak-ass cop-out. Especially after the Batman who said that went back on it after a grand total of 1 Joker rampage. The Batman in Batman Superman's obviously lived through several Joker rampages, and they were nowhere near as pleasant as the one his predecessor lived through in 2008. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a Robin suit under glass in the Batcave. A bit of fan service that's the semiotic equivalent of a neutron bomb, to those of us who know what it means. I'd have scrubbed the Joker's little love note off myself, but then again, I'm not insane. And that love note's not even for Batman. Really, it's for us, out here, the audience. It tells us that pretty much exactly what we think happened, in pretty much the way we imagine. This, in turn, tells us where we are in the arc of Batman's life story. One of the most fully fleshed out life stories in all of comics. And by the way, shout out to Jeremy Irons for being a great Alfred. I can already tell I'm not going to have time to give him his due props later on, so here they are now. So 20 years basting in Gotham's ambient insanity, combined with one bad day in Metropolis, drive Batman to spend the first 2 hours of this film trying to steal kryptonite from Lex Luthor, who is both fully aware of and actively encouraging Batsy's efforts. Why waste time trying to kill a couple of capes when you can just get them to kill each other? Some question whether this Lex Luthor deserves his name either, but as far as I'm concerned, he earned it several times over. His evil plan is as Lex Luthor as they come. First, by the fact that it's more like 3 evil plans stacked together like some kind of extra evil Matryoshka doll. Like all of the best Lex Luthor plans, it starts off ideological and ends up all too personal for its own good. And much like Lois in the last movie, this Lex earned my goodwill by being smart enough to figure everything out, including Clark's middle name, which, oddly enough, turns out to be Joseph, presumably as in of Arimathea. This saves us years of pissing around the bushes, unearths the actual core of Lex's conflict with Clark Joe, states it outright in as bald, har har, a manner as possible, and was promptly greeted by cries of Lex's plot makes no sense. What the fuck is this? Number theory? I mean, it's simple. We destroy the Superman by turning the entire world against him. First, by blackmailing a survivor of the opening scene in Africa into telling Congress a sad story, which contains a reinforcement of that prevailing worldview I mentioned. The anti-theme. He will never answer to you, she tells Congress. He answers to no one. Not even, I think, to God. Then, by recruiting a Wayne Enterprises employee to personally call Superman out. One way or another, you get Superman to the U.S. Capitol, bomb it while he's inside, and make him look like the illegal alien terrorist some are already dying to call him. Especially if that line of protesters outside the Capitol is any indication. Another quick side note, I want one of those anti-Superman t-shirts. Not for the sentiment, you understand. It's just that the design is too striking not to add to my collection. At the same time, Lex offers to arm the U.S. government against this new terrorist threat, and uses that to gain access to the biggest cache of alien technology this side of Area 51, including his own monster maker. Even starts out trying to get the U.S. taxpayer to fit the R&D bill for his kryptonite bullets, in true blue pork barrel military contractor fashion. Now that's the real American way. But Junior Senator from Kentucky Finch ain't buying that shit. Maybe Lex should have offered to build a fertilizer factory in some bullshit podunk town in her district. But, nah. Can you imagine Lex Luthor wandering around small-town America? Odds are he'd start perving on a bunch of high school students. And that would probably wind up being the least creepy thing he does. In contrast to most depictions of sitting politicians, Senator Finch here is cast as a figure who's truly principled in her own narrow way. A third way, if you will, unswayed by the power of Superman's biology or Lex Luthor's money. Wally's story is bait. Lex knows the senator can't resist because A, she's a politician, and B, her soul has yet to calcify into the inert lump of radioactive rock that his has become. Hell, she'll never see the trap until it springs, because she's the kind of person who says things like, in a democracy, good is a conversation, not a unilateral decision. In other words, unbearably naive. Thing is, we actually live in a republic, designed by hardcore Roman Republic fanboys, where good becomes a unilateral decision every time someone puts a stamp on a piece of paper, especially an envelope with a check inside. Those really get things done. But back to Wally. On top of creating a great image, the message Wally writes on that ugly-looking statue Metropolis put up to honor the dead in the last film, false god, has the added value of being true. One of the most annoying results of making Superman an American Christ metaphor, Richard, is that ugly Americans tend to take that metaphor a bit literally. This means they view Superman as a stand-in for God, and that means he's really a stand-in for their dads. And since their dads were statistically dumb, disappointing humans full of flaws, assuming they were even around in the first place, Superman must be just as dumb, and just as inevitably bound to disappoint. It's the old theodicy problem in tights. In his big villain speech, near the end, Lex reveals he's solved this 3 to 1700-year-old philosophical problem the way most modern atheists do, by going fuck it. He even mangles that old Epicurus quote everyone used to throw around back when there were still Christian apologists on YouTube to throw it at. He views any appreciation of Superman as an irrational devotion to a false ideal that must be crushed outright in as dramatic a manner as possible. That way, all the gullible sheeple might just wake up. And, of course, praise Lex Luthor as their true savior and liberator. Because Lex is, at his core, a malignant narcissist with a building's worth of daddy issues. As evidenced by the fact he says "my father" more often than Jaime fucking Lannister. The real question becomes, when did Lex first learn about Batman? And it's a question this text does not answer, because it has other priorities, not all of them good. Lex does have a throwaway line about the meta-human thesis, and a throwaway explanation of what it might entail. But we never know who came up with that thesis in the first place. My money's on Lex, since he's the one with a computer full of teaser trailers for other movies. And he must have been digging a while, because Themyscira is already onto him, and they've sent their best, well, only field agent on the case. But instead of asking any of these questions, the chattering classes asked a whole mess of stupid ones. None of which were dumber than, why does Batman have so many nightmares? Motherfucker, if you saw half the shit Batman sees on a nightly basis, you'd never sleep again. And even if you managed that, you'd probably start drinking to wake up in the morning instead of drinking to fall asleep like the rest of us. Would you still be conscientious enough to get your butler his morning tea? I hope so. The first of Batman's nightmares is straightforward graveside fan service, which has a long tradition in Bat lore. This time the grave bleeds, and a giant bat monster breaks through, which is the kind of subtle symbolism I've come to expect from this writer-director team. Bats has let the Bruce Wayne side of himself atrophy, as shown by the state of stately Wayne Manor, several of Alfred's stage-muttered cutting remarks, and the fact that they both moved into the glass house on the edge of the lake that hides the entrance to the Batcave. Wait a second. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones at Superman? Okay, I take it back. That's the kind of subtle symbolism I've come to expect from the writer of the Dark Knight trilogy and the director of Watchmen. Nice one, guys. That was a slow burn. Took me a while, but, Batman's second nightmare is a bit more abstract, and made more confusing than it really needs to be. I mean, sure, I know what that giant Omega symbol on the ground means, but I don't expect anyone who doesn't to be ameliorated by the 10-minute exegesis of it I could give them. Nobody asked. Most of them probably didn't even know until now about the growing contingent of Bat fandom that would very much like to see the Caped Crusader as a Mad Max freedom fighter, road warrioring his days away against the forces of fascism. Here, in what I call the Injustice Dream, that future, and the Bat's worst fears about Superman, come to life. They're pretty obvious fears, born out of complete ignorance and surface-level semiotics. But hell, I can see 'em. Superman. Übermensch. The Nietzschean ideal made manifest and blindly worshipped by ignorant masses, more in love with control and stability than they are with anything else. Then there's the dream that's probably not even a dream, right afterward, when Bruce false awakens to find the Flash popping through the fabric of reality, dropping needlessly cryptic hints on all of our heads. Part of me greeted this with a staunch "fuck you, Barry." We're a movie and a half in, and you're already trying to fuck up the timeline with your cosmic treadmill. Get your red ass back to the fucking future before you break reality again and we all wind up in the Flashpoint universe. But since these reviews exist in part to challenge my fellow comic book fans' knee-jerk reactionary anger, I'm gonna take a deep breath, calm down, and examine the possibility that there just might be a little bit more going on here. After years of watching these things unfold, it's become pretty clear to me that big-budget franchise filmmaking is a fucking nightmare. A dream job for those who don't have it. It seems to chew up and spit out everyone who gets it. If the rise and fall of Josh Trank isn't already a cautionary tale, I made a 24-minute review of his Fantastic Four film in an attempt to kickstart that process. Given all that, I find the decision to put teasers for future films inside one of our protagonists' nightmares to be more than a little sly. Might even go far enough to call it subversive. A cry for help from a team of artists who probably don't want to ride this roller coaster forever. This is not their theme park. They're trapped in here just like the rest of us. Only they have a much better perspective on just how fucked up things are. So these days, I'm less angry at Barry's cameo, and more concerned by the giant deferred payoff that it represents. At some point, we're going to see the other half of this scene. And it probably won't be anywhere near as awesome as the ones we're inventing in our heads in the meantime. In any case, Barry delivers his little warning, as he himself notices, too soon. So he only winds up reinforcing Batman's paranoid delusions. Time, then, to explain why comic book nerds really hated this Batman, over and above their objections to his killing, which I dismissed as soon as I heard about them. It's because this film shares a lot of superficial aesthetic elements with the 1986 comic book The Dark Knight Returns, the ur-text of modern Batman comics, written and illustrated by a young Frank Miller before his future as a crazy racist old man finally caught up with him. Nevertheless, Dark Knight Returns got Miller labeled a fascist, or at best, a fascist apologist, long before calling people you don't like fascists became as cool as it is on the internet today. Then 9/11 broke Miller's brain, and his increasingly unhinged rants in favor of W's wars, and the horrors they led to, turned him into a modern comic book community pariah. So, the current thinking among my peers goes, everything even remotely connected to Miller's work must be shunned and publicly ridiculed as often and as loudly as possible. How else can the right-minded comic book fan avoid accidentally endorsing fascism? This conundrum's complicated, in part because DC Comics is currently ruled over by people who came of age when Miller was at his most influential. Their ideas about what comic book superhero stories should be were inevitably informed by either Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, or both. Usually both. Watchmen's original run started just 3 months after DKR's concluded. This leads your typical right-minded comic book fan to the inevitable conclusion that they must reject all of DC Comics, root and stem. Not for any good reason, mind you, like the shitty way management treats all but their top-tier creators. And hell, even they are probably getting screwed over in ways they're too job-conscious to talk about in public, but to avoid being publicly shamed for our entertainment choices. Which is funny, because that's going to happen anyway, and we have no control over it whatsoever. And I'll even concede that, yes, Batman straight up quotes his Frank Miller-pinned counterpart when he says, "We're criminals, Alfred. We've always been criminals. Nothing's changed." But I'd argue he only does so Alfred Pennyworth, royal smart person of the Bat family, can immediately refute it. Everything's changed, he says, and it has. Superman's here, and everyone's freaking out because, previous to Man of Steel's alien invasion, all this world seems to have dealt with are the kind of costumed crazy people Gotham City breeds like flies, what with it being on top of a haunted swamp and all. In fact, if I have my geography right, this Gotham is more like Metropolis's Jersey City than anything else. And I count this as another point in the movie's favor, because it's frighteningly accurate. And just so we're clear, fuck Frank Miller and everything he stands for. There's a media montage, media break, you might say, an hour into this movie that kicks the ass out of every 6-panel grid and or splash page media montage Frank ever came up with in all his years making comics. Props for having Charlie Rose on to ask Senator Finch, is it really surprising that the most powerful man in the world should be a figure of controversy? I honestly had to throw up my hands at that one. Probably ruined the experience of whoever was sitting behind me in the theater. Like, alright, Charlie, you got me. Fair enough. And this movie got me by having Clark call his mom once the media break concludes. She exposes Bruce Wayne's longing for a time above, a time before, for the false god it really is, by telling her son the horrible truth. Nothing was ever simple. Also, I enjoy any random montage of Clark flying around doing super shit. Wish it were more connected to the plot, but then again, this plot's got enough threads as it is. Whatever the case, Lex Luthor makes the, at first dumb, but in retrospect probably intentional, mistake of trying to smuggle kryptonite into the US via Gotham City's docks. There's a shot of Batman on a crane here that's very Chris Nolan. The new Batmobile, by contrast, is pure Tim Burton, right down to the cannons. And so begins this movie's car chase. Within universe, this chase exists to highlight what a massive hypocrite Batman's being. But Batman can't be hypocritical and a hero, can he? That's never happened before, except for all those times it's totally happened. And here he is, having nightmares about a world where someone else gets to wield absolute power, as he pilots his bastard offspring of tank and fighter jet through the streets of the city he claims to love. Does he lie to himself about how all his collateral damage is totally justified? Or is that what the pills are for? I rip on Batman because I love him, even as he's tear-assing through Gotham. You know what I don't love? The fact that someone, somewhere, seems to have mandated that every goddamn Batman film include a goddamn car chase. This is our 6th one in as many movies, and it's getting so goddamn ridiculous I'm gratuitously overjoyed to see Superman show up and put an end to it by being a humanoid roadblock, even if I think his plan to out-intimidate Batman is foolish. That's what you call a mistake of youth. Clark's in Gotham, in part, because he watched that poor woman question his accountability before Congress, and he wanted to answer her, personally. Like a man with, oh God, what is that word? Integrity? I'm on the internet, never heard about it. Luckily, Perry White just happens to give him a bullshit college football assignment across the bay. The very presence of which tells me our filmmakers knew exactly what they were doing. Or being asked to do by corporate, whatever the case may be. College football matches, like obligatory pre-team-up fights between superheroes, are one of the most pointless public rituals in American life, despite the incredible amount of significance everyone attaches to them. So, about that titular fight. First, Lex kidnaps Lois because she spent this whole movie patiently tracking down his super bullets, which I'm sure were nothing but beta tests for his eventual kryptonite bullets, back to their source. And then Lex kidnaps Martha Kent to leverage her son into killing Batman, whom, it turns out, he's been manipulating all this time into killing Superman. But, as he says, didn't take that much to push him over. Some feel Clark loses his temper too quickly and makes the tactical error of trying to smack some sense into Batman, which is kind of like trying to make Niagara Falls run uphill in the middle of spring. But he spent this whole movie stewing in Batman's flagrant hypocrisy. Honestly, wouldn't it make you mad seeing this rich asshole brutalize his city's underclass to his heart's content, while you can't even stop an alien invasion without crowds of protesters forming outside your public appearances? And personally, I think Clark shows remarkable restraint for a guy who just got bombed and found out his mom's been kidnapped by mercenaries. He tries at least 3 times to say, hey, this shit is crazy. And every time, Batman cuts him off with another weapon. Up to and including kryptonite gas, which can end any conversation faster than a wet fart. Nothing could really top the Superman vs. Zod brawl from the last movie, and this fight certainly doesn't try. That's a good thing, though, because the fight later that does try winds up being a far too typical, largely pointless exercise in big-budget franchise filmmaking. This title bout, on the other hand, mostly confines itself to one crumbling film noir-esque building. Half expected the crew from The Matrix to come winding its way up those stairs. After a certain point, strategy goes out the window, and our combatants start hitting each other with everything, including the bathroom sink. I particularly like when Clark throws Batman through a whole line of bathroom stalls. The fact quis custodiet ipsos custodius is scribbled on one wall, and the pile of rusty steel radiators Batman throws Clark onto, which I suspect Bats arranged there specifically for the purpose. Then, at the end, after Batman's told him he was never a man, and once again quoted Frank fucking Miller at us, Clark manages to gasp out, "You have to save Martha." One can only assume Bruce's boot on his neck prevents him from gasping out her last name. So it falls to Lois, arriving via helicopter to save Clark's ass by explaining things to the Bat. In his anger, Batman viewed Superman as little more than another alien invader, and never did the basic legwork you're supposed to do when you're trying to track down and kill a person. His inability to perceive Clark as a man shatters in the face of a woman literally throwing herself between them. And yes, the amazing coincidence of their moms' names. one that no previous piece of Batman-Superman fiction, to my knowledge, in all 75 plus years of their history, has thought to exploit. Ever. Certainly not as a way to bring the two of them together. This movie got absolutely no credit for that, though. In fact, it got the opposite of credit. People laughed. All I have to do is say the Martha scene, and everyone on Twitter knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't even have to stick a joke after it. It's supposedly a joke in and of itself. We spend so much time bemoaning the lack of original or creative thought in our popular art, especially monthly serialized popular art, that whenever it does show up, we barely even believe it. I've had actual conversations with actual human beings who think, like, we're convinced completely that this movie made Batman's mom's name Martha, specifically so it could force this ending. And yes, I did straight up say, motherfucker, her name's been Martha since the 1930s. And these have been self-professed comic book fans who love bemoaning how much fan service non-readers regularly miss in all of the Marvel movies. As if most of that isn't on the level of the prisoner number Lex winds up with at the end of all this. AC 23 1940. That is, Action Comics number 23 from April 1940, which featured Lex's first appearance. Personally, I got the intent of the Martha scene right away, and was pleasantly surprised with its inventiveness. Should there have been a scene where Lois laid out the entire plot for Batman in a third-act expository monologue? All my critical training says fuck no, but the confused reaction to this movie points to yes. So once again, this movie should have been longer. Its theatrical run certainly should have been longer, about half an hour, say. Though even for a frequent visitor to the Gotham Metropolis corridor like myself, 3 hours is quite long enough, thanks. And we haven't even gotten to the climactic battle, which makes things even longer still. Speaking of which, how's it fucking hanging, Diana? Gal Gadot turned out better than I feared she might, so her presence here is nice. And not just because I've been a Bats and Diana shipper since the two of them shared a dance in the Justice League cartoon. Unfortunately, the start of their relationship, whatever form it might take eventually, makes this movie longer and more muddled. The both of them take frequent breaks during the middle hour of this film to stare at screens, watching either A, Superman's plot, or B, teasers for the upcoming Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg movies, along with Wonder Woman's own solo outing. This only gives your average brain-dead audience member more of an excuse to stop paying attention, assuming they were even doing that in the first place. The Doomsday fight certainly got itself some immediate historical significance, what with it being the first live-action staging of Superman's death. They didn't chicken out and make Doomsday a robot either, so that's cool. The sight of Wonder Woman cutting Doomsday's arm off with her sword is fucking awesome. And the big damn hero shot of the Holy Trinity finally all assembled would have been awesome if I hadn't seen it literally 10 bazillion times before I actually saw the movie. Other than that, this fight doesn't have much going for it. Same problem as the World Engine. Impersonal threats versus personal ones. And no, growing this Doomsday out of Zod's corpse doesn't really help. Got no idea how much of him is still in there. He does turn up his nose at the statue, but that just means he has taste. Clark's last goodbye is pretty nice, though. It underlines the whole power as a tool with indeterminate usage thing I was talking about all the way back in the beginning. With him using the kryptonite spear Batman was going to use to murder him, to murder the fuck out of Doomsday. And so the movie ends right back where it started, with a funeral. Superman gets full military honors and an empty coffin. Clark Kent gets buried in his hometown, surrounded by a house full of friends and relatives. And like I said, God must have given Smallville's local priest a leaked copy of Justice League's script. Batman and Wonder Woman might not have it, but the whole experience has renewed their faith in humanity. After all, if humanity could raise itself a Superman, maybe there's something to us after all. So this isn't about the death of hope, as some would have it. Quite the opposite, I think. Like any god worth worshipping, hope must become mortal and die in order to be reborn. Why do you think I'm doing all this? It's only in the hope that these rants might temporarily cut through the years of social reinforcement. And maybe, just maybe, inspire you to hope as well. This world is awful, but it can be better. We can make it better together.
A fool's errand, at best.
Hey, I'd rather do that than stick "not" in front of every character's name, or try to come up with my own version of the same 5 or 6 fucking jokes. And where'd you go anyway, stranger?
Oh, nowhere special. I was only procuring your doomsday.
You mean Suicide Squad, don't you?
Yeah.